Sometime around the end of the 9th day, we stripped the canvas off the old sledge the recent arrivals had brought down with them, and strung it up over the wooden poles we'd had the boys working on in the sawmill. The Dumnonii crew were about to show up, so had to pretend that it was no problem at all to accommodate them. Everyone was grumbling that they didn't just go to Winterhome. Much better stuff than tents there, they all imagined. Well, there was actually. Proper buildings and beds, and thanks to the shattered generator, the cold kept the corpse smell to a minimum. That's good real estate when civilization's a single burst steam valve from ending. That night I was brought out of my tent to answer a legal question. A young woman from our new ironworking shed had fallen out with a colleague over some stick she was getting on account of being a young woman in an ironworking shed, as if that was the most unusual part of our situation. She had challenged the man in question to a formal duel, to great uproar. Now I was hearing complaints that she wished not only to play at blacksmithing, but at being a gentleman of honour. I was getting a blasting from both directions, as some told me to end the madness, and others to see it through to a just conclusion. Told them no firearms, no blades, and no money was to be involved. Then I walked away. The whole thing reminded me of the one time I wished to duel a man, but was turned away because of our differing rank. It was Connaught, the Duke who'd come to rescue me from Ghana a few years back, and was now, I was reliably informed, suitably dead. That murderer needed... In fact, thinking on it, let's not fill this volume with talk of all that. Some people were about to start jeering at me for letting those two fight in the streets, but the combatants were at it right away with a wrench and hammer, both of which didn't stay in their clumsy gloves for long. Better that than a silent grudge that turns into a hot poker in the back one day. I just wanted to sleep, but Six was shouting from the window of the lab about an emergency situation. Between that and the young mother getting punched across the jaw in the street below, the scene was certainly unsavoury. I went inside, and things got much worse. Godfrey and his team had stumbled across some of our lost crew. They'd set up shop in a cave, but a group of polar bears wanted in as well. In the words of the message, crew under siege, situation perilous. The scouts had a rifle and 2 makeshift crossbows. Ordered that they be put to use. Then a long wait in Six's boiling workshop. At least the silence of the radiograph cooled me down from the inside. After a good half an hour of nothing, Six started scanning other wavelengths for signals. Atrabati still had power, apparently, beeping away out there. Then he found a signal that activated the typewriter, but the message was just a mess of letters coming through in bursts. "I dare say this is the work of a malfunction," Six said. "Or perhaps Godfrey left the transmitter on with the type box in his rucksack. Yes, that would explain it." His eyes, through 2 planes of glass, showed me the truth of it. It was not the work of a malfunction or mistake, but of an amateur. Someone who couldn't operate the transmitter had their hands on it and were trying to reach us. That was all I needed to know about how things had gone. "Bring them in," was all I said to Six as I left. Pretended to sleep for 2 hours or so, then went round the tents to get some hands together. 2 guys breaking the surface with picks, then 2 more digging the softer earth below with shovels. More guys than that per dig site is inefficient. Everyone starts falling over each other, especially as the grave gets deep. In my group, it was me and Blacknell using the picks. Sought him out specifically so I could help him. One of the scouts was Rhoda, his wife. I told him the truth, that I'd ordered them to fight. Expected a duel there and then, but the man was broken. He dug when I told him to dig, but he didn't say or do anything else after that. I suppose that was all I needed from anyone. No idea whether me helping him dig made things better or worse with him, but it certainly gave a bad first impression when the Dumnonii crew were suddenly gathered around our hole, asking if I was the Atrabati's captain. Yep, and don't worry, these graves aren't for you quite yet, but I hope you brought shovels. They had, actually, and a load of serious industrial gear bound for Winterhome. Godfrey had done the right thing, sending them to us, and earned himself a nice, machine-cut final resting place as his reward. The humans who came with all that stuff were quite useful too. While many of us had been military families and honourable dischargees like myself, these guys were younger, junior officers in the guards, yet were much less brain-dead than Connaught's personal retinue from Cape Coast had been. They had weapons, were in relatively good health, no kids, and stood to bloody attention when they found out I outranked them. Had my new scouts right there, and they'd provide much more than their share of food once they got out there with the hunters. The only thing they did to spoil my impression of them was to ask about Winterhome, but at least they took no for an answer. I was quietly optimistic, while the rest of us were mourning our dead and waiting for the remains to be delivered. They came in the small hours of the 11th day, dragged on their own sleds by folk who had once been our comrades. I say once, for even at 3 AM people were happy to emerge from the warmth of the tent lines to vocally blame the shivering mass for our losses. That suited me, obviously. There were quite a few of them in said mass, and many were more than just shivering. Kids in there, signs of frostbite on a few, and they all wanted food desperately. Back down to earth. We were out of food, having divided our meagre surplus between the strapping lads from Wellington and the 2 sled trains I'd sent out, one to finally link up with the Atrebates, and one to investigate Winterhome's external coal mine for, well, anything that wasn't too terrifying to report back. The new scouts didn't know what they were walking into out there, and nor did I want them to know, but people were asking me when we'd be making contact with Winterhome constantly. I could only drag my feet for so long. There I was then, getting Ross up at the break of dawn, ready to give the new folk a literal taste of the poorhouses, but I was too hasty. Those damned Guards Regiment buttered bacon clean cuts pulled through with their hunting like it was a do at the game woods in Cranbourne, bringing in, interestingly enough, a polar bear that had died from a prior bullet wound. Godfrey was netting the points from 6 feet under, the bloody marvel. Then there was the other reason we'd be okay for food for a while. The crew still waiting at the Atrebates had plenty to spare, so reported the scouts. The reason why followed in their next transmission. They had been waiting for us. Waiting for me, I suppose. No coal left in the Dreadnought, and the steam tanks had only enough push for a few dim lights and that damned broadband pulsing on the radiograph. They had emptied out what was left of the main water tank over the boiler, cut the side open and dragged piles of furniture and canvas inside to make a bunker of sorts. We weren't just too late, we were far too late. About 50 of them were in there, buried in junk. Junk that was meant to keep the warmth of their huddle in for as long as possible. Metal skeleton of the Dreadnought spread the cold easily enough. The boiler tank conducted heat even better. 6 said the coal shelves would have been a better spot. Guess we'd have still been too late though. Message said that none of the bodies were coming back with the scouts. They weren't going anywhere, frozen together, arm in arm, desperate to share in the warmth that simply didn't exist. I wondered what they thought about as they died there, waiting for me. Still wonder, although I've a better idea nowadays. Thoughts like that made me realise what New London needed to do to survive. I could sit there at the lab window with my feet on the radiator, staring at my pistol, or I could forget what needed to be forgotten, and survive. Everyone needed to do that. And there was one easy method. We needed to gather up all the berries, roots, or whatever stuff we weren't going to eat, and brew some god-forsaken kind of drink that would kill you only just the right amount. Ordered a drinking hall built behind the mess hall for that kind of thing, which cheered everyone up a measure. Tried to stop people finding out that it was built from the timber the scouts brought back from the Atrebates. In the shorter term, Six Eyes had a way to cheer me up. Took me down to the basement of the lab where the kids were kept these days, and revealed what his team had been working on. They had used some of the iron our boys, and girls as mentioned, had dug up, smelted it into something akin to steel, and made a new coal-fired compressor. With these we could make much more steam than with just the generator, and we could position them closer to where the steam was actually being used. Plus, like the tower, the thing was sufficiently inefficient that it gave off heat like an endless bonfire. The kids were eager to help us carry the thing out into the streets, and watched carefully from within their oversized coats as we bolted it onto 4 iron legs and then tilted it to stand upright, like an archway that belched out smoke from its red-hot top. It was extremely dangerous, no doubt about that. The legs could buckle, the fire could melt the burner and drop hot coals into the street, and of course steam compressors were liable to explode, as Winterhome must have discovered the hard way. But all that was nothing against how it let us house all the new arrivals and give Painsworth more space to treat their ailments. The extra steam pressure would prove vital quite soon. We were going to be receiving even more hungry mouths and quivering hands, according to the latest scout report. After returning from Atrobates, they'd gone to investigate the area into which part of our crew had ventured while trying to get back to the Dreadnought from our doubtful original search for New London. They were all still alive, but by now you're probably aware that being alive in the Frostlands is usually only possible by inheriting food and shelter from those already dead, and this was no exception. Lucky buggers had found a particularly safe spot. They were living in a huge observatory, connected to one of the Royal Society facilities that were supposedly all over the place. This one in particular wasn't just there to claim territory, but to legitimately study the effects of the Yellowstone eruption on the atmosphere. Negative, as it turns out. We got a really long message on the radiograph that took all of lunchtime to come through. It was a report relaying the gist of what our people had learned from the observatory's logs. Goes without saying that the original crew were dead, although most of them had apparently gone elsewhere for that, so technically I should say they were missing, as casualty reports tend to do. Yet the work they had done while waiting for resupply from England had proven, apparently, that the ash in the sky was not entirely to blame for the ice on the ground. No, it was something that was, incredibly, even worse. The sun itself was darkening. The flame was going out. It was a preposterous claim, but when we got the data books back from the place later on, there was nothing amiss in their methods. In fact, some aspects of the truth were self-evident. Much of the ash in the sky had fallen with the rain, with the snow, and then, when it was too cold even for snow, the ash became precipitation unto itself. The day sky was still perfectly bright, as all knew, because the ash had spent months falling onto the ground. More than half of the original problem had been solved, in a sense, by this alone, yet colder we got. In addition, the gases from the eruption, invisible ones that let light pass through, were still up there, and according to those scientists there was a chance that their interaction with certain kinds of light, certain spectra they wrote, would cause the planet to become warmer. There was one way to explain the differing reality, they thought, and their experiments showed it to be true. It was not that less light was making it to the planet's surface, but that less light was coming. In other words, the sun was going out. No one would believe it. Good. Couldn't have anyone buying into this, not for a minute. God had seen us here, trying to survive the great seizure of his finest creation, and in his unlimited spite, he had begun to snuff out the torchlight by which anything ever has and would live. So it was all pointless, New London, or anything else. The death cults were right. Should have just lined everyone up and spared them the tease of a horrid final chapter to our story. Of course I didn't, because I wanted God to understand something. We had to do everything we could to survive to the very end, so that when it was all over, God would look down at us in the last flickers of the solar ember and see us huddled together, waiting for him to have mercy on us, believing in something until the last loyal, silent heartbeat. I wanted God to feel what I had felt. I wanted to give him his own Atrobates.